The third balloon popped during the icebreaker. That's how I knew this merger was going to be a slow-motion car crash. There I was, perched on a rental folding chair in a conference room that smelled like vendor muffins and toner, pretending to care about synergy jeopardy, while the new OmniVector integration team pranced around with color-coded name tags and corporate pep. Meanwhile, every time one of their consultants said the word alignment, I pictured a guillotine blade gliding quietly into position. My name's Gavin Trent. Yes, a woman named Gavin, blame my grandpa, and I'd been at Virexon longer than the fire code signs on the damn wall. 9 years, 2 acquisitions, and 1 nervous breakdown ago, I helped stitch together the APIs that scaled our platform from a scrappy SaaS tool into the $1.2 billion unicorn these suited parasites were now absorbing like corporate tapeworms. And now, I was watching my life's work get sliced into decks and bullet points by people who thought redundancy was just a tech term. Spoiler, it's not. If you've made it this far, take a second to subscribe and like the video. It means more than you know, and it keeps stories like this alive when corporate claptrap tries to silence them. Really helps the team too. All right. Back to the carnage. Anyway, it wasn't just the icebreakers or the sad coffee. It was the way they looked at us, like we were items on a spreadsheet, cells to delete for formatting. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 28 with loafers shinier than his resume, leaned across the table and asked me, "So what exactly does product integration do now that we're centralizing architecture?" The sentence came out smiling, but I felt the scalpel in it. What do I do? I stop your precious back end from turning into a flaming dumpster of unmet dependencies, Kyle. But I didn't say that. I smiled, sipped my cold brew, said, "Let's wait for the next deck. Maybe I'll learn too." Later that day, I watched them huddle outside the glass wall of the executive suite like vultures in Lululemon. They talked in lowered voices with a kind of "don't worry, she can't hear us" arrogance that always betrays the insecure. I wasn't worried. I'd heard phrases like cost harmonization, org flattening, and headcount optimization before. You don't sit through 3 rounds of Series A chaos without learning when the axe is being sharpened. What they didn't know, what no one in that building remembered, was the contract I signed 6 years ago, when Virexon was still duct taping its way through scaling hell. We were desperate for talent back then. Desperate enough that I, a woman with a strange name and a reputation for being blunt, negotiated a clause so obscure even our original GC asked, "You sure you want to include that?" I'd smiled then. Same smile I wore now. Hell yes, I wanted it, and it was still in there. All 11 paragraphs of Section 11B, I sandwiched between tax withholding language and arbitration venue stipulations. What they were about to trigger wasn't just a layoff. It was a payout mechanism, a corporate cyanide capsule with a sweet aftertaste of irony, but I kept quiet. Let them play their game of Monopoly with human lives. Let them shuffle boxes and buzzwords. I sat through that Monday alignment session like a ghost in denim, taking notes I'd never read, nodding at ideas that wouldn't last the week. The slide on departmental overlap came up near the end. A chart showed 2 dots, OmniVector product strategy and Virexon integration lead, connected by a red line labeled redundant. That was me. A dot on their little murder board. I smiled again. Let them mark me redundant. I dare them. They scheduled it for 3:09 p.m., which was corporate speak for "let's hope she doesn't cry before happy hour." I knew before I even walked into the room. You don't get a calendar invite titled "Quick Sync" from HR and 2 VPs unless someone's about to pretend they're doing you a favor while stabbing you through the name tag. The room was offensively beige. A rented glass box with fake ficus plants and a tray of untouched biscotti meant to humanize the guillotine. Across the table sat 2 men in matching navy sport coats, Jason and Brett, which I'm convinced are the default names for mid-level execs who fail upward. HR rep in the corner, tapping her iPad like she's ordering my career off Amazon. "Gavin," Jason began, folding his hands like a disappointed youth pastor. "This isn't easy. We want to start by thanking you for your contributions." "Cut the foreplay," I said, not unkindly. "Just tell me which PowerPoint slide I got replaced by." Brett gave a nervous chuckle. Jason didn't. "You'll understand," he said. "It's just business. Your role, it overlaps with an existing position at OmniVector HQ. It's not personal." not personal. That's corporate code for, we didn't bother learning what you do, but it looked expensive. I nodded once, calmly. No flinch, no twitch. I already knew what they didn't. This wasn't a firing. This was an execution of contract terms. And they had just pulled the trigger. They slid the folder across the table like they were offering me a menu. Standard exit package, Jason said. 3-month severance, continuation of benefits, NDA attached. We're happy to offer a reference, of course. Of course. I flipped through it with all the urgency of a woman browsing a JCPenney catalog in 1998. Halfway through, I saw it. Page 7, subclause 5, a short line buried in the exit language referencing all governing provisions under initial employment contract shall remain in effect. They hadn't scrubbed it, not even a footnote. Rookie mistake. I paused, let my finger hover just long enough over that line to make Brett shift in his chair. Jason tilted his head. Everything all right? Just soaking in the moment, I said, then flipped to the last page and signed. No protest, no second read, just a signature and a half smile. That's what rattled them, I think. They expected confusion, maybe anger, maybe tears. Instead, they got a woman who looked like she'd already left the building a week ago. I slid the folder back. Anything else? Jason cleared his throat. We'd appreciate if you didn't post anything on social media for a few days. Internal morale, you know? Of course, I said. Wouldn't want to ruin the surprise. They didn't laugh. Not even HR, who looked like she suddenly needed to recheck her calendar. I stood, shook no hands, and walked out with my head high, my spine straight and my pulse at resting, because this wasn't the end of something. It was the fuse being lit. In the hallway, someone from sales gave me that awkward half-smile reserved for people on their way out. Hey, I just heard. I'm so sorry. I nodded. Don't be. I'm not. They assumed they'd removed a line item. They had no idea they'd just activated a $14.6 million trigger wired directly into their merger agreement. Let the countdown begin. There was no goodbye bagel spread. No awkward group photo in the break room. No slideshow of forced smiles from happier fiscal quarters. They just deactivated my email and erased me from Slack like a typo in a quarterly report. And I let them. I didn't send the farewell email. I didn't post some cringy onward and upward manifesto on LinkedIn. I didn't even tell my team. The truth was, most of them had already been siphoned into OmniVector's machine like spare parts. The ones who were left were busy trying to survive the reorg carousel. Everyone was too busy updating their resumes to notice one ghost walking out the front door. I boxed up my things in 20 minutes flat. My office wasn't sentimental, just functional. A monitor stand I paid for myself. A mug that said, 0 bugs given. A dying succulent I named Roy out of spite. Roy came with me. So did the manila envelope from my bottom drawer. That envelope held every version of my original contract. Every rider, every signed appendix, every red line, including the one that mattered. Exhibit D, Section 11B. Yay. The poison pill. A clause so specific, so buried that even I'd forgotten about it until the merger talks began 6 months ago. I remember leaning back in my chair, rereading the language one night after a particularly vague org design update Zoom call. My heart had started pounding halfway through the paragraph. It was airtight. If I was terminated without cause within 12 months of a change in control event, defined explicitly as acquisition, merger, or board transition, I was entitled to full acceleration of all unvested stock options and a compensatory equity adjustment based on the last round valuation. In layman's terms, a check big enough to send the CFO into cardiac arrest. They signed it 6 years ago, during the great talent scramble, when Virexon was burning cash faster than we could raise it. I had leverage back then. A proven track record, 2 poached offers from competitors, and a willingness to walk. Legal had balked, but the founder wanted me on board badly enough to override them. Nobody thought it would ever matter. Until now. By Tuesday morning, my inbox was full of question marks and condolences. Wait, what? You? WTF is happening over there? Please tell me you're joking. I answered them all with the same 2 words. All good. Because it was. Better than good. It was finally happening. By noon, I was in my kitchen with a French press on the phone with Simone, my attorney, and a woman whose voice could turn steel into soup. They pulled the trigger, I said, watching steam curl up from my mug. Did they cite cause? Nope. Said my role was redundant. All smiles and streamlining. Idiots, she muttered. That's what we needed. I'll prep the letter of execution. They'll receive it before close of business Friday. Make sure you include the valuation adjustment, I said, and the investor clause. They're public now. It'll hit the filings. She paused, then let out a low whistle. You really kept the receipts, huh? They kept the arrogance, I said. Seemed fair. After we hung up, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Not to job hunt, not to check messages, just to pull up the investor deck OmniVector had proudly emailed to all staff last month, showing a cheery graph of acquisition synergy savings. My face wasn't on a single slide, but Section 11B, I didn't care about slide decks. It cared about signatures, and every single one of theirs was already in my drawer. Thursday morning, I was on the floor in pigeon pose when Simone texted me. We're a go. Docs are prepped. Sending to GC tomorrow EOD. I didn't reply. Just held the stretch, breathed through my hip sockets, and let that number, 14.6 million, settle into my bloodstream like warm whiskey. Not rage, not revenge, just gravity. I'd read somewhere that revenge was a dish best served cold. But this wasn't a dish. It was a clause. And clauses don't care if you're bitter. They care if you're right. The blinds were open. Portland light filtered in like soft static. My phone buzzed again. An old coworker asking if I wanted to grab drinks and process it all. I put it face down. There was nothing to process. They pulled the trigger. I'd just spent the week making sure the barrel was pointed in the right direction. Simone had combed through everything. The clause wasn't just valid. It was countersigned, dated, and attached to a rider the new OmniVector legal team never even asked for during diligence. Exhibit D. Change in control protections for executive-level technical personnel. That alone was funny. They didn't even know they'd bought a time bomb. She walked me through it the night before, sounding more excited than I'd ever heard her. It's not just the acceleration, she'd said, because they went public mid-merger. Your options converted into performance equity at the new valuation, with the adjustment multiplier baked in. 14.6, I guessed? Yep, and it's not negotiable. It's executable. I sipped my tea. So we press the button? She laughed. Gavin, the button's already pressed. Friday is just when they hear the beep. Meanwhile, OmniVector's stock was soaring. CNBC ran a glowing article about the Virexon acquisition and its flawless operational synergy. Investors were frothing. The CEO was quoted calling the merger a milestone of strategic alignment. They posted a video of him ringing the virtual closing bell with a grin so wide it looked painful. Comments underneath were full of fire emojis and MBA praise. No one knew that a single line of old legal text had just opened a vein beneath their champagne-soaked optimism. That night, I sat on my porch with Roy, the succulent, a blanket, and a bourbon the color of revenge. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even mad. Honestly, I felt more clear than I had in years. There's a certain purity in being erased on paper while knowing the ink still bleeds in the footnotes. Somewhere in a glass tower, a finance analyst was about to open an envelope labeled Execution of Severance Clause, 11B, as in I, pursuant to Merger Agreement Exhibit D. Inside, it was all there, signed, sealed, wrapped in the kind of legal precision that left no oxygen for denial. They'd see the number, they'd check the signatures, and then someone would say, wait, who's Gavin Trent again? By morning, they'd remember, because 14.6 million doesn't go unnoticed in a quarterly earnings call, especially when it comes from the line item they thought they deleted. It hit their inbox at 8:04 a.m. sharp. Subject line, Execution of Contractual Clause, 11B Ndikshiki, urgent. Simone doesn't do dramatics. Her emails are scalpel clean, the kind that draw blood without a single exclamation mark. The letter was 7 pages of cold, precise language citing my original Virexon contract, Exhibit D in full, cross-referenced against OmniVector's own merger filings. By 8:17, the fire had already started. At 9:12, their GC replied, polite and firm, "We're reviewing and will respond shortly." At 10:41, the first call came in. I was walking my dog, a rescue mutt named Larry who looked like he was built out of spare parts from 3 different breeds, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. San Francisco area code. I let it go to voicemail. Larry had just found a pine cone worth fighting, and I wasn't about to ruin his day with legal whining. Second buzz, text this time. Gavin, this is Michelle R. from OmniVector Legal. We'd like to discuss the recent communication sent by your counsel. Are you available to connect? I took a sip of my coffee and typed back, busy this morning, maybe later. Truth is, I wasn't busy. I just wanted them to marinate in it, to pace those sleek glass hallways muttering my name like it was a curse carved into the drywall. Inside their legal war room, panic was already boiling. They couldn't find the clause. Their version of the contract, scrubbed, sanitized, stripped down by overworked junior associates during merger diligence, didn't include the rider. It had been missed, or ignored. Or maybe they'd assumed legacy contracts were safe to standardize. They were wrong. Simone's letter attached a scanned copy of the original, with all signatures intact. Mine, Virexon's former CEO, 2 witnesses, and the cherry on top, the founder's personal memo stapled to the back, handwritten, "Lock this in, she's worth it." They hadn't just missed it, they'd bought it. By noon, I finally answered. Gavin, thank you for getting back to us, Michelle said, her voice clipped but professional. We just want to clarify a few points from your counsel's communication. I let her finish the whole pitch, tone warm, language measured, that classic corporate cadence of surely we can resolve this without litigation. Then she said it, the line they always reach for when they're cornered. We'd like to discuss this amicably. I smiled. Larry barked at a squirrel. You already did, I said. Back when you signed the papers, this is just execution. A long pause. She didn't have a script for that. We'll be in touch, she said finally, her tone flat. I'm sure you will. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my jacket. Larry trotted beside me, proud of himself for chasing the squirrel halfway up a tree. We turned down the block like it was any other day, but it wasn't. Somewhere, their finance team was scrambling to reconcile a $14.6 million line item that didn't exist on their budget forecast. Somewhere, someone in investor relations was being told, you need to prep a disclosure. And somewhere, a sweaty analyst was asking the only question that mattered, who the hell is Gavin Trent? You'll learn. The problem with executing a $14.6 million payout to someone you labeled redundant is that it doesn't stay quiet. Not when your merger agreement includes a share stability clause tied to accelerated equity events. And mine wasn't just a golden parachute. It was a damn airstrike. By Tuesday afternoon, it started. The dilution trigger. Buried deep in OmniVector's own merger agreement, Section 4.9bV was a clause written to prevent panic among early investors. It stated that any unplanned equity acceleration event exceeding $10 million would require the company to repurchase an equivalent number of shares from the open market to maintain balance, and more importantly, keep their share price from nosediving during the next quarterly report. That clause was meant to reassure their boardroom that they had contingencies in place. Instead, it just detonated a second bomb. Because when Simone's letter landed and legal processed the payout, finance had no choice but to execute the repurchase. Over 188,000 shares bought back at a premium using operational funds they'd earmarked for expansion into Southeast Asia. The market didn't notice at first, just a blip in volume, a whisper on the ticker, but the investors did. By Thursday, questions were coming in. A VC partner posted on LinkedIn about unusual repurchase behavior and tagged 2 finance reporters like he was leaving breadcrumbs. One of OmniVector's board members demanded a closed-door session to review legacy contract exposure. And the nail in the coffin? Their quarterly risk disclosure draft now included a new line item under emerging liabilities. Pending contractual obligations originating from pre-merger executive agreements, including a $14.6 million severance execution issued to G. Trent. That was the first time my name had been on one of their decks. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. I was watering Roy and watching the chaos unfold from a secondhand iPad while eating leftover risotto. There's a strange calm that comes with being underestimated. You don't have to show up. You don't have to shout. You just exist like smoke under the door, proof that something's already burning. And then came the twist. Friday evening, a screenshot started circulating online. A Slack message thread from inside Omnivector, time-stamped 3 weeks before I was let go. It showed the CFO posting a note. Flagging Gavin Trent, check equity exposure. She was part of the original exec tier at Virexon, might have had legacy terms. The response? Don't worry, legal scrubbed all contracts during diligence. She's a mid-level now. No risk. They dismissed me. Literally. Someone leaked it anonymously to Blind and it spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. Almao, imagine deleting 14 mananars thinking she's mid-level. This is why you read the F-sacking writers, Haiting people. Virexon was built on her integration layer. That clause is probably the smartest code she ever wrote. Still, I didn't post, didn't reply, didn't reshare. Let them keep speculating. Because while they were trying to explain my name to shareholders, I was just fine being invisible. It's easier to pull levers when no one's watching your hands. It started with a raised voice, rare in those corridors of glass and soft lighting. Omnivector's founder, Gerald Maxton, had flown in under the radar for the quarterly board briefing, expecting a round of back-patting and champagne about seamless integration. What he got instead was a spreadsheet with a $14.6 million payout labeled Legacy Severance Execution, G. Trent, and a footnote that used the word triggered. According to a stunned intern who later spilled to a friend who posted it on a VC Discord I sometimes read for sport. The first words out of Gerald's mouth were, "You fired who?" He wasn't yelling, not yet, but the kind of cold, tight fury that makes the room temperature drop 10 degrees had set in like a barometric shift. Legal stammered. HR shuffled papers. The M&A lead, a Harvard grad with a LinkedIn profile that still said M&A wizard in his tagline, tried to offer context. She was categorized as redundant during phase 2 of the role merge. We aligned the Virexon integration lead with the Omnivector system strategist and that triggered a dilution clause, Gerald snapped. Did you even read the legacy contracts? HR piped up, her voice thinner than rice paper. We believed the clause would be null due to role duplication. It's standard in restructure language. Did you believe that legally? Gerald said, leaning forward. Or did you hope no one would notice the writer attached to Exhibit D? Silence. Then the general counsel slid a printed copy of my original contract across the table. Highlighted, countersigned, writer stapled, initials intact, ironclad. Gerald read in silence. When he got to section 11B, he exhaled sharply through his nose and tossed the folder onto the table like it was radioactive. This, he said, is why you don't fire the people who helped build the thing. I wasn't there, obviously, but I heard the aftershocks. Emails went out, Slack channels locked down, internal whispers multiplied like spores. I became the subject of a dozen nervous meetings and one particularly panicked legal review. My name was no longer forgotten. It was repeated carefully, softly, like if they said it too loud, I might appear. That Monday, a friend from accounting texted me a photo. It was my ID badge, still hanging from the hook in the front desk cubby. Not deactivated, she wrote. Still works. They forgot to kill your access. I laughed. Not because I planned to use it. I had zero desire to walk back into that mausoleum of hubris, but because it was perfect. A symbol. Proof that they erased me on paper but forgot the system that mattered. They stripped the title, cut the headcount, triggered the clause, but the door still opened. That same day, someone tried to loop me into a chain email about a lingering software integration issue. They CC'd the wrong Gavin, not realizing I was still technically in the directory. I replied with a single sentence. I believe your systems are misaligned. No signature, no emojis. The thread went dead after that. I took Larry on a longer walk that evening. The air was cooler and the sky had that clear, post-rain crispness I love. I didn't listen to music, just let the silence stretch. Somewhere, Gerald was demanding a full audit of all remaining Virexon contracts. Somewhere, the people who thought I was dead weight were rereading the fine print with a highlighter and a queasy stomach. And somewhere, someone finally whispered in a meeting. We should have just left her alone. The line item appeared halfway down page 6 of Omnivector's investor update, right after the section about operational wins in Q2 And just before the blurb about expanding into Singapore, legacy contractual severance disbursement, 14.6 meter, change in control clause, G Trent. 3 lines. One name, one firestorm. Within minutes of the filing going public, my name trended. Quietly, not on Twitter, but in the darker corners of finance Slack groups, in VC WhatsApp threads, in the footnotes of analyst memos filled with polite panic. And in the quarterly investor call that followed, one brave shareholder finally asked what half the room was thinking. Who is Gavin Trent? That was when Gerald's son, Brandon Maxton, newly installed VP of Operations thanks to Bloodline's Not Backbone, stepped up to the mic and committed the dumbest act of corporate self-harm I've seen in a decade. He laughed, not loudly, just one of those tight, arrogant chuckles that sounds rehearsed and fragile all at once. Then he said, "That was an accounting misclassification. A line item from legacy systems we're in the process of modernizing." Let that sink in. He called me a misclassification. Somewhere in that office, Gerald was probably reaching for a blood pressure pill while the legal team collectively inhaled through their teeth. But me? I was in my backyard, hands in soil, replanting basil. Roy the succulent sat nearby in a thrifted ceramic pot, and Larry was busy chewing the edge of a garden glove I'd already surrendered to his custody. I had dirt under my nails and sunlight on my shoulders when my phone buzzed again. It was Jenna, one of our old back-end devs. We hadn't talked in over a year. "Gav, that was you, right? The 14.6M? Holy hell." Then another ping. Marcus from QA. "Please tell me you negotiated that clause on purpose. I need to hire whoever taught you contract jujitsu." Then 3 more. Then 8. By the time I came in to wash up, I had 21 new messages and 3 voicemails from people I hadn't heard from since our first Series B. Most of them didn't want jobs. They wanted advice, perspective, a path. They'd seen what happened. They'd felt the sting of being pushed aside by merger-happy overlords. And now they were waking up to the idea that maybe the smartest person in the room wasn't the one running the earnings call. Maybe it was the one pulling weeds in Oregon while her claws detonated from 900 miles away. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. Instead, I drafted a reply I could send to all of them at once. Negotiate like they'll forget. Write it like they'll never read it. Sign it when they need you. Enforce it when they think they don't. I hit send and went back to my herbs. Let the founder's son spin whatever narrative helped him sleep. The truth was in the filings. And when your name shows up on a disclosure like that, you don't need to explain yourself. The balance sheet already did. At 8:46 a.m. on a gray Tuesday in late spring, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea and a page of seed catalog notes when my phone buzzed. No ringtone, no bells or confetti, just a quiet little ding from my banking app. Deposit received, 14 dame was 615,900. 1 minute later, an email from Simone. Funds confirmed, filing closed, clause resolved. Breathe. I didn't breathe. I exhaled, slow, quiet, like someone had just let the pressure valve open after years of waiting for the room to blow. I closed the app, didn't take a screenshot, didn't send it to anyone. That number didn't need to be flaunted. It just needed to exist. Legally, permanently, and in the center of Omnivector's books like a fossilized middle finger. By noon, the press had caught on. Not about me, not directly. Just a short but scathing note buried in the quarterly SEC filing. Unanticipated operational expense of $17.4 million attributed to fulfillment of contractual severance under legacy executive terms. They rounded up, bless them. Included the legal fees, the share repurchase buffer, and, if I had to guess, a fat consulting invoice from one of their cleanup firms. No names, no headlines. Just an expense they had to explain with clenched jaws and full transparency. And the best part? Investors didn't even flinch. Stock held. No mass sell-off. But the narrative shifted. Slightly, quietly, suddenly all those Virex and staffers who were brushed aside weren't just ghosts. They were questions. Legacies, footnotes with teeth. By mid-afternoon, I had my bag packed. Not a luxury getaway, not some movie montage revenge trip. Just a quiet 3-day escape to a cabin in eastern Oregon I'd been eyeing for years. No signal, no spreadsheets. Just trees and time. I left Larry with my neighbor, set the house lights on a timer, and double-checked Roy was soaking up sun on the windowsill. Before I walked out, I opened my laptop one last time, checked nothing in particular, just the filing, the clause, my bank. Then I shut it, locked the door behind me, and smiled. Not like someone who'd won, but like someone who finally didn't have to fight anymore. Because in the end, they never saw it coming. They didn't bother to look. They deleted my name and forgot the clause. They made assumptions. They moved fast. They hired sons and scribbled over the old contracts with glossy new visions. But they forgot one thing. Sometimes dead weight just knows where all the levers are hidden.